Hello, Kings fans. Welcome back. It's Lina Washington and Sean Cunningham. And we're 3 games into this wonderful experience in Orlando. Hasn't been the happiest place on earth for the Kings, who are now 0-3 in the bubble after their 114-110 overtime loss to the Mavericks, who didn't hold the lead in the entire game until the final 5 minutes of overtime. So, Sean, was this the Kings team that you were expecting to see, or is this a team that we can't recognize anymore from the one that we saw in March?
Yeah, I don't know what to expect. I mean, I think the only thing that we know that we can count on from this team is, for the most part, pretty good effort. They're going to foul a ton. They're not going to get to the free throw line, and they're going to dig themselves a big hole that they have to climb out of. And I think we're doing this show after they lose to the Dallas Mavericks in overtime on Wednesday. Certainly, it was their best outing of the official games. But you fall to 0-3, you dig yourself a big hole. I said this team's probably going to go 4-4. That looks like it would be a pipe dream at this point. But it hasn't been easy. It hasn't been easy for any team. I mean, there's a lot of unexpecteds, like the Memphis Grizzlies are 0-3 to start. Your Phoenix Suns are 3-0 to start on the Devin Booker, walk off today. And it just has a very odd vibe to it. It doesn't feel like things are going well. But that said, like, you look at the way this game happened with Dallas today, and honestly, they lost. Luka had video game type numbers. They gave him 50 free throw attempts, and you only went 12 times to the free throw line. And you gave up 19 points in the overtime period, only scored 13 in the fourth. Like, what are we talking about? You should have been blown out. How is that not a blowout? Luka Doncic, after the game, said it was one of the worst games they've ever played, and they won. So, I mean, if you're the Kings, certainly, I mean, you really beat yourself. It was a better effort. It was a better start. But, yeah, same result. Hopefully, but the way things I just talked about how the way the West is looking right now, they're only 3.5 out still. Technically, you're still in it. You got nothing to lose. Look, Phoenix could go undefeated, and we were thinking they could go undefeated and may not make the 8th seed even still, or even make the tournament just based on the way other teams. Now it's looking like, shoot, they could make some noise and maybe even contend for that 9. They're playing like they have nothing to lose, and that's essentially what you wanted to see from the Kings, and we just haven't.
Yeah, absolutely a better effort than the first 2 official outings than we saw, but at the end of the day, it's the 3rd loss. Again, another great effort by De'Aaron Fox with 28 points, but man, this team just can't seem to execute down the stretch. That final minute where just shots were not falling, they could not buy a bucket, and then the game winner that could have been by De'Aaron Fox did not go in. But Sean, I mean,
were you okay with that? I was okay with that look. They didn't call timeout. Yeah,
absolutely. But it didn't go in, and their fortunes were not in their favor leading up to that moment, even in the sequences leading up to that final minute and those final seconds. But you're saying that they still have a chance. That may be true, but they played the Pelicans twice, the Nets, the Rockets, and the Lakers. I don't see them winning 3 of those games. I don't see them maybe even winning 2, to be honest with you. And I gotta say, I'm kind of shocked that they're performing so poorly with the stakes that they know are up ahead for them. And I held myself back from getting my tweets off, but I'll just say it here. I mean, Buddy Hield wanted all the smoke. This is what all the smoke looks like. You have it right here, and they're not responding to it very well. So, I mean, they have a chance to get their look at Zion Williamson, which is, of course, what we were waiting to see when the whole NBA went into suspension back in March. But they are playing with plenty to lose. I mean, I think a lot of people are banking on the Pelicans to at least compete with the Grizzlies. We got a little preview of that earlier this week for that 9th seed, but I don't even see them I see them maybe beating the Nets, and that would be a gift, I think.
I mean, Phoenix came in as the lowest team on the totem pole, and now that's where the Kings are. And on paper, you're right. When we looked at the way, San Antonio and Orlando, you didn't even think San Antonio really wanted to be there. Orlando, you're like, well, they're pretty much set in the East. But on paper, you thought, okay, those might be your 2 most winnable games because of the way the you were expecting the West to compete. And maybe with Brooklyn, but that's on the second night of a back-to-back. So, we'll see. But, you're getting 3 games in 4 nights in this scenario right now. And I think I kind of think it's a good thing. I really do. Certainly not the way things have played out, but I think it actually does set the table rather well for them to play well. You're facing a team in New Orleans to start where that was the team you felt that if you were going to make any noise, you had to leapfrog. Well, you still have that opportunity. Zion Williamson, the training wheels are off for him, it seems, where the minutes restriction were there for the first few games, but they're 1-2. They're having their battles. Even their win wasn't pretty. So for them to be able to pull that off, and granted, that was the last game they played, was, they get their win with Zion actually coming out and being able to play in the fourth quarter, which you weren't able to see in those first 2 games. So I do think that actually kind of bodes well for them. It wouldn't surprise me because, we talked about how this team gets into deficits and big holes that they have to claw their way out of. And I think there is a little bit of a parallel there, believe it or not, from what happens in games to even in looking in this situation. Like, would it shock anyone, and maybe it would, but I think for us who's been around this team long enough, it's not going to shock us to see them rattle off 3 wins in a row. Maybe based on the way that they've started games and the way they played, certainly I get it, but it's a parallel to the way they approach games, with all of a sudden you're in a 15-point hole going into the second quarter, or you're trailing 20 at half, and you've got to claw your way back from that. And certainly that you've seen the team capable of making a run. You've seen them be competitive. I think it's just a matter of and I think this was a perfect scenario, this Dallas game today. First quarter, Luke makes a change in the lineup. He's got 3 guards, 3 playmakers, at least their best playmakers on the team, maybe with the exception of Harry Giles, but from the guard position anyway. And you have a fantastic opening quarter. That's what you were wanting to see. You score, 39 points or something like that? And then you rattle off and you decline from there. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that once things stop going your way and you get away from the ball movement, they all of a sudden think they have to play hero ball, and they put it upon themselves. One player puts them upon themselves to just ISO the hell out of the ball and try and put it on themselves to score. And then it compacts and it just becomes a bigger and bigger problem. So that's what I think really happened in the fourth quarter and overtime. So if they can just somehow figure that out, their backs are against the wall. Now they're playing with less pressure. You wish they had played that way the entire time, but it wouldn't surprise me to see this team all of a sudden rattle off three wins straight. But I just think it's too little too late.
Absolutely. I mean, we saw this team again. This is the team that started off 0-5 to start the season. I mean, De'Aaron Fox gets hurt, Marvin Bagley gets hurt, and then fast forward a couple months, and they are in the playoff conversation. They're one of the more exciting teams to watch. I don't see that dynamic really happening in this truncated 8 games that they have to at least contend for a play-in with the Grizzlies. But you mentioned some of the factors that played into this game, but the free throw attempt discrepancy. I mean, 50 free throw attempts to 12. Even Luke Walton said, I've never seen a 50 free throw game. And absolutely, if they had sunk all of them, I mean, that could have been even more catastrophic for the Kings. It should have been a blowout.
Yeah, and we know the Kings don't get to the free throw line. They only got there 12 times. So when you're looking at the box score and you go 50 to 12, you're like, what the hell? What's going on? Why is this a big discrepancy? You foul a lot. And Luke was pissed after the game in talking about the fouls, and he wasn't trying to blame officiating. And certainly, there's going to be moments where the officials just miss. But that wasn't the case today. You might argue 1 or 2 here, but it's all on them, and it has to do with the switches and the screens and them grabbing onto jerseys, and it's just foolish fouls that, I mean, you almost wonder if the officials have to go, okay, well, we can't call everything. You guys aren't, but they are. They're going to do it, and they didn't reward them with anything. They didn't swallow the whistle, and they're guilty of it. And I mean, I'll ask you. I mean, to me, I'm just astounded that they were even in the game. I really am.
Yeah, I mean, I got to tell you, I was kind of tuning out a bit at the end of the fourth quarter. And then within the last 5 minutes, I said, okay, these are the Kings that we remember, where we have to watch until the final bucket to see if they prevail or if we have to change our storyline for our newscast, depending on whichever way this result goes. But
and to that point, I mean, it's not one or two things. It's a laundry list of things, and this team is unrecognizable from what we saw going in. But oddly enough, they're almost doing the exact same behavior we saw in the first 5 games to start the season.
Right. It's truly remarkable how this team has ebbed and flowed in its growth and its regression almost, because we've heard about these turnovers. Even before Luke Walton was a coach, turnovers were a problem here. The offensive rebounds, or lack thereof, were a problem here. The pace of the game not being as fast as they should be under De'Aaron Fox as the floor general, and how fast as he is. That was a problem, and those are contributing factors. And we've heard it's all the little things that don't add up. I think it's safe to say at this point these are pretty big things. If these are recurring issues that you're noticing in your team, and in again a season that every minute matters, every possession matters. You can't be throwing away the ball in the final seconds. You can't, costly turnovers like that. We've seen them in October, in December, and now we're seeing them in what would be their April, right? Their March or April. And it's remarkable that this team has gone from a playoff contender somewhere where we were optimistic towards the end of March or the middle of March that they can make a run, and now it's back to the same feeling that Kings fans have had for going on 14 seasons now, where it's a lot of apologies, excuses, a lot of we understand, but no real changes in results. And I think a lot of people are growing frustrated. And just in the social listening that I've seen on my timeline,
it's
even
bad.
the fact that Luke Walton keeps referring to the film, everyone wants to know where the film is or what film they're watching, because it seems pretty evident that whatever is being communicated is not being executed on the floor, and that's a problem when you're playing at this high of a level.
Yeah, and look, Luke couches a lot of it. He's trying to not kill his team. Maybe he needs to. I think fans might love to see that, but Luke's just not going to do that. He doesn't want to lose the locker room. So he does see progress. He does see things that are better, but it's the 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and I'll even take it a step further. Like you see guys who are just in funks right now, and a lot of it is on them, but I also put a lot of them on the player themselves. I get that, Bogey right now hasn't, especially today, and hopefully that shot he hit at the end of overtime carries into something that's, optimistic and progressive for the next game.
His 1 of 15 attempts in the entire game.
Yeah, the lone shot
from Bogdanovich of all people.
And it was a hell of a shot. High arcing 3. I mean, that was great. And then Buddy, obviously, he's been conflicted and dealing with his own problems all year long. And, I think the organization shares a lot of the blame in that, because the one thing athletes, it doesn't matter what sport it is, you can't kill the confidence. And a lot of these guys do struggle with confidence. Ordinarily, Buddy is a very confident person. Even through struggles, he's a very confident person. But he, aside from just losing the shooting touch, the one thing they've really tried to make him into is a playmaker. And a playmaker, have him play with guys that I don't think are real suited for his game. I think he needs to be with a playmaker at all times. And one of those playmakers has to be Fox or Bogdanovich. So putting him in this spot where all of a sudden you reward him with the contract, and I used a real world situation. I don't like doing that with sports, but I'll use it for the sake of argument. Lina, we work in a company, and I'm going to give you a promotion. I think the world of you and what you've done. You're a big part of my of the corporation going forward. And you know what? Why don't you move your office right next to mine, because we're in lockstep with one another. And then 2 weeks later, you didn't do anything really differently. And I just said, Lina, why don't you pack up your stuff, as I almost cursed, and go to the end of the hall, because I'm going to bring somebody else in over here. You're still going to get your money, but I don't know, all of a sudden just don't have the faith in you as I once did just 2 weeks ago, through no fault of your own. Like, what's he supposed to do? Like how does he overcome that? Now, granted, a lot of it, I don't want to make excuses for him. He still has to pull through that. That's just the nature of sports. And to his credit, his level of competition is always there. He'll handle any role possible. But you've, in a way, cut him off at the knees and really killed his confidence, and you've turned him into this player who always has to think about it. He's a mistake player as it is. Like, he's going to take some risks and some chances, and he wants to, share shots and everything like that, but play to his strengths. And look, that's just one little element of a lot of things that have gone wrong, but I think that's one thing that has snowballed so much, and you're really seeing it compound here in the bubble.
Yes, absolutely. And every decision is magnified, right? Because the time is of the essence. I mean, every minute, as we mentioned, is valuable for the 5 to 6. Gosh, I wasn't even counting the Suns as a team that was contending for the 8th or 9th seed, but now they are. And so I don't know what 2020 is, Sean. I truly don't. But it's been at least pretty exciting games in the bubble for the most part. Even teams that were down, like the Celtics, by double digits, they come back and make it exciting. One thing that I did notice, and I know that you've noticed this in previous games, but as someone who, Golden One Center is not my home arena, but I am continually impressed by how the arena would fill up for a team that's, it's not a secret, has been disappointing for the better part of a decade, almost.
Well, that's being kind.
I'm trying to be kind, right? So they still pull 18,000 people on a Wednesday night to come watch them get their teeth kicked in by George, or Paul George or whoever. But there were so many empty seats in the virtual fan section for the Kings home game today. And I communicated with one of the more vocal fans, shout out Jillian, she even said we tried to get seats and we couldn't. So I got to know what's going on with that, because you got people like Paul Pierce, you got players' girlfriends getting seats, but there were far too many empty seats for what would be a typical Kings game, no matter where it is, at Golden One Center, at UNLV, in Orlando. So, I mean, Sean, what's your take on that?
Well, I learned a lot about it. I still don't know what the hell and how to do it. I don't know what anyone does to go and do it, but I will say I learned a lot about it because that first game when the season retipped, and I'm watching the Pelicans game, and I'm like, someone's trolling New Orleans and their fan base because all the virtual seats are empty. And then they started popping up a little bit, and I didn't realize that it wasn't just a video board, and that and actually what it was, that people could actually get on these things. So I did learn a little bit about it, but I will say, like, that's stupid. Like, why would anybody want to do that? Like, you're going to put your game on your computer and sit there like this and cheer and do what you can. I guess that's being a big fan. Hopefully you've got the TV.
What better things do we have to do right now, Sean? We're all stuck in the house, bored in the house, and we're in the house bored, okay?
Yeah, well, there's also these things called jobs that hopefully some people still have. And, it's also 11:30 in the morning, and it's not 7 o'clock at night when they're used to rooting for their team. So there are issues. People are working from home. The sun's shining outside. I don't know. The last thing I would want to do is sit there in front of a computer monitor like I'm doing and do this for my team. And in hopes to get on the video board. Like, that's not for me, but good for anybody that does it.
I mean, it's only because you already get paid to do it without the cheering part of it all, because that's not allowed on Media Row.
No, I mean, you could do it. You could say, you know what, Lina, Sean, you could do that for a Rihanna concert. Just do that, and you'll be on the big. No, why would I do that?
I'm hard pressed to believe you would not go virtual for a Rihanna concert, Sean. That's a lie.
Yeah, it might be. It might be, but I'm just saying, I don't get it, but certainly you wouldn't think that it would be that hard to fill that. I mean, it's not like there's that many. I think that you look behind the bench and there's like 20, maybe 25. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, based on what I see on my timeline for every Kings game for about 3 to 4 hours, whenever they play, I know they could have filled those virtual seats.
I did see a dog behind the Kings bench today, so that was
important.
Virtual dog, and it looked like a golden lab. So that's cool.
An important addition to the crowd and the scene there in Orlando. Well, we do know that the Lakers have earned the number 1 seed in the West. No surprise, I think, to many people. But Sean, I'll ask you one more time, since we're 3 games in and you're still at least not mathematically counting out the Kings. Do they at least get to the 9th seed to earn a play-in game, based on what we know and what we've seen from the other teams, from your Portlands, from your Grizzlies, from your Suns. I mean, you've got some teams that are really shifting. The Spurs, even now, they're suddenly coming into contention.
Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? What if it's the Spurs and the Suns in the play-in game?
Man, it would be like old times.
Yeah. No, I mean, of course not. I'm not picking them to do that. I didn't really pick them to do it beforehand, even if they went 500. So it is baffling to see so many teams struggle. So I think a lot of that can just be blamed on the environment and the uniqueness of it all. And look, these guys are around each other all the time now. And they've been like that for almost a month now. Really a month, I think now, even before getting to the Orlando bubble. So it's just unique circumstances, and it really tests teams' chemistry. And look, the craziest thing about this is in those first two games with San Antonio and Orlando, those are two teams that don't score the ball. They're not going to blow anybody out of games except for the Kings. And they did. San Antonio was down 3 starters, and they benched They benched Patty Mills. Patty was fine. Pop's like, no, I'm going to give him the night off. Okay, great. How did they win? They just win from just playing simple execution basketball, sticking to the plan, moving the ball. And the only really common thread between Orlando and San Antonio is they have 2 fantastic coaches, and Greg Popovich for San Antonio and Steve Clifford for the Magic. And it's one of those. It's really hard to explain. And you give up 40 points in the opening quarter, and you get your teeth kicked in by the tune of over 120 points in both of those games. And then the crazy part is seeing your team not run. The Kings are just not running. They didn't get fast break points until the third quarter in that game against the Magic. It was better today. The ball movement was better today. But then again, as I mentioned earlier, you get into just a little bit of adversity, and they just go away from moving the ball, and everything stagnates. And it's just, if they can break that, and they still almost won. So if they can break that, if they can somehow get to the free throw line, figure out, I mean, at some point, that was one of the things I saw in that Orlando game. In the third quarter, you were down 35, 30, whatever it was. Like, how did you not just empty the bench and just save your guys, especially with a 3 games in 4 night scenario coming on? And I think Luke realizes, playoffs or not, like this, you're not going to get off that easily. He wants his guys to play defense. He demands certain things of them, and he's not going to try to, cover for them in the game. So fortunately, there are some bright spots. I think if this goes on much longer to where they're not winning any games and you're all of a sudden looking towards next season, hopefully that means you're seeing much more of Harry Giles, much more of DeQuan Jeffries, because they have some pretty big decisions coming up. And I know we haven't really talked about the offseason, but it's not going to be easy based on the salary cap, especially with guys that they've already paid. And you've got a point guard now that you have to extend. So you've got some really big decisions coming up with the likes of Harry Giles, Bogdan Bogdanovic, even Kent Bazemore and things like that. So it's going to be really, really tough.
Yeah, and even De'Aaron Fox mentioned after this loss that even though things do not look great with an 0-3 start, they're still building towards next season, and they're still not mathematically out of it, so they're going to keep going. I mean, he said there's no giving up in this team. They're not going to just roll over, right? And as you mentioned, they do need to look ahead to building upon this season, because we saw some bright spots from Harry Giles and even DeQuan Jeffries in the scrimmages. And unfortunately for a lot of Kings fans I know who love Harry Giles, they did not pick up his option. So they have a big decision to make with him, and for a guy who's overcome so much adversity, for a place like Sacramento to have taken him in his first NBA home. I know that's going to be an interesting time in terms of discussions between those camps, but it's
I should point out though, I mean, I say they have a big decision to make with Harry. It's really not that big. It's whether any other team offers some more money than they can offer. So I guess the other teams really make it harder than anything. So, but they put themselves in that scenario.
Maybe it's not so much as a big decision, but some big moves that will be made for Kings fans who have grown to love this team that's come together over the last 2-3 years, this core of Bogey, Fox, Buddy, who we know just signed, his contract extension earlier this season. But it's at least going to hopefully leave the Kings fans with some optimism in these last 5 contests that this team has to kind of show what they're made of. I mean, we've heard the disrespect from national media and the response from certain players, and again, you gotta walk the walk if you're going to talk the talk. You can't take issue with something that is, perceived in this way. I mean, again, you're down 36 to the Magic, and essentially a must-win game. You gotta earn that.
And one thing I've thought about, and I haven't really asked anybody this, but I'll ask you because you look at the way this team, and we both weren't very high on the way this season would go, even coming in. And I used, you have a first-time head coach with this unit. Dave Yeager had the luxury of having a few years with the team to be able to finally pull off a 39 win or 29 30 season, and then he gets let go. So I didn't think it was just going to automatically work for Luke. So that being said, this environment is like a playoff environment because they're pressure games. Every game matters, but it's just the only thing you don't have. It's just not a series. So having the experience, I think, is a good thing, but I don't know that they're anywhere closer to being a playoff team than they were at the end of last season, if that makes sense. So, I mean, in comparing where they are, and primarily the rosters are, for the most part, the same. Obviously, you've added important pieces like Rashawn Holmes, who's for the future of this team, who's obviously had a really good impact, and Kent Bazemore, who knows what that looks like long term, but he's been a guy that's been so vocal in the locker room. He hustles, he adds things that this team doesn't have, particularly on the defensive end. Been a huge bright spot, and who knows if you have him going forward. But even still, like, the roster could look better for the future, but I don't know that they're anywhere closer to where they want to be.
Yeah, no, and I would have to agree with you. I mean, they've got a bunch of different pieces. When you look at this roster, you have veterans, you have champions, you have guys who played for Team USA, you have guys who are in their second year who haven't had much playing time, you have guys who are trying to find their way in the NBA as a two-way player or a draft pick. And so I just feel like the collection of players that they have right now does not make them the team that they need to be, so to speak, to contend with a Western Conference team. I mean, you have guys that are able to create and make plays when you need them, but they might not, as we've seen, be able to do that with certain personnel or certain situations. But I think I was among the many people who were confused about the move with Yeager, not necessarily surprised, but again, you deliver the winningest season of this team's or this organization's last 10, 13 years, and then you get let go, and then this is the follow-up to that. I think that brings a lot of question marks to people in terms of how did we get better? What has changed? What has improved with this move? But of course, there are a lot of factors of injuries and the season in and of itself, the way that it's suspended.
And they weren't going to extend him. With Yeager, they just, they knew that in order to, they would have probably loved to have him for one more year, but in doing so, you'd have to guarantee like 3 more. So it wasn't. They just knew that they weren't going to extend him. So in doing so, plus they knew that the guy that, at least they, and I say they, Vlade knew the guy that he wanted all along was going to be available, which is why they didn't interview anybody else. So having Luke Walton is like, right, wrong, or indifferent. I've always credited, if you get the guy you want, well, then who can really fault you? At least you went with the one that you wanted all along. So now you got to make it work. And we'll see.
Yes,
I never like saying we'll see, but I'm right there with you. I'm not convinced that they're in a better spot than they were at the end of last year. So what we do know is if they continue losing the way they are, they're going to improve their lottery position.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think we saw that this team wasn't the team that we expected them to be when the season even started, right? When they came off to that sluggish start, and they weren't even in the playoff conversation when a calendar year earlier, they were the talk of the town. They were the surprise team. They were the dark horse. And it just seems like we're just shaking the snow globe, and the snow keeps settling the same way every season. And I only covered this team for 3 seasons now, Sean. I can only imagine what it's like for you growing up in Sacramento, but we do know we'll have at least 5 more games to talk about the Kings, 5 more games guaranteed for Sacramento. They will face the Pelicans twice. They get the Nets in between those 2 matchups, and then they get the Rockets and the Lakers. So
yeah, and you like just as you said briefly, coming into I was talked into 34 wins. I had them at 33 because and they're at 28. So 34. I mean, it's and there were people that were saying 45. Like
how's that?
There were plenty. There were plenty. We have some very optimistic local media. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'll leave it at that.
Well, if you want to rock with your favorite real local media members who keep it 100 with you every single time, we're on YouTube or Twitter, not so much Facebook, sometimes Instagram. You can find us at L Washington TV, Sean Cunningham as well, or Sean.Cunningham on Instagram. And
yeah, the Instagram's fun because you get my up to way too early playlists.
Oh yes, I did see that. I was not a fan of the some selections, but
how dare you?
I'll keep that to myself. I have not had time to really sit with folklore yet, but I did respect the Paramore on your latest playlist.
No, it was Evanescence. How dare you?
Didn't you have Paramore on there as well?
No,
I think you did.
No, maybe like weeks back, like when pandemic first started. But no, I put an Evanescence track up there because I'm a big fan of it. Amy Lee is back, and yeah, I'm not the biggest Taylor fan. I went with that Taylor song with is it Bon Iver? Bon Iver? I think I said
Bon
it right.
Iver.
Okay, yeah.
Anything but Bon Iver.
Bon Iver. This gentleman named Bon Iver. I thought it was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. But yeah, I get to do that on Instagram because I don't scare. Maybe I do scare away people, and that's why I don't have as big of a following on Instagram as I do on Twitter.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't guarantee any playlists, but I can guarantee at least
lots of cats.
Lots of cats, lots of dogs. In fact, Griffey, come here. Can you come
here? Here we go. Brace yourselves, folks.
Come here. Griffey, come here. Come here. All right, let's see the ABC 10 mascot. Oh, here he is, folks. Oh, okay. Well, that went swimmingly.
There it went. And if you can see this dog's eyes, you get extra points.
Yay! Well, we did trim his hairs, so here he is.
His skater haircut.
To be fair, his mom's from Seattle, so I can't say that Griffey's probably much of a Kings fan, but and of course he is named after Ken Griffey, the kid himself, not the senior, who was former manager of the Bakersfield Blaze, now defunct. But
I think we have a Bakersfield reference in almost every one of these.
I hope so, because I'm making a point of it, and
You're welcome.
I'm happy you found that Easter egg. But if you want more Bakersfield references or more Kings basketball talk, subscribe to our Kings playlist on Hello Sports or ABC 10 on YouTube, and we will see you back here next week when we know if the Kings are going to be enjoying the Magic Kingdom a little earlier than some of their colleagues in the NBA or extending their stay in Disney World.